Hello, I'm Milan Leich. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, in this episode, we're diving into the drama-filled Swiss peace summit centered on the war in Ukraine. Over the weekend, only the Euros were a more internationally uniting event that's got everyone from Kiev to Kamchatka buzzing. Picture this, a luxurious alpine resort in Switzerland. This was the setting for a two-day summit on peace prospects in Ukraine, held between the 15th and the 16th of June. The main takeaway, a vaguely worded endorsement of a negotiated end to the Russia-Ukraine war. That's right, a vague endorsement. Because when it comes to international diplomacy, vagueness is the new black, apparently. Now, you might be thinking, hey, doesn't this mean the West is running out of steam in supporting Ukraine? That's the question we will pose today. But first, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The Kremlin has publicly dismissed the outcomes of the Ukraine Peace Summit held in Switzerland, stating that the event produced zero results. The summit, which was held without Putin's participation, gathered almost 100 leaders keen to discuss peace.
I think he made a mistake not being here. This whole process started a year ago with 14, 15 national security advisors, and here we are today with half of the UN at the leaders level in many cases of many countries.
The summit aimed to gather international support for Ukraine amidst the ongoing conflict. The absence of major players like China and the non-participation of Russia, however, raised concerns of its effectiveness.
The main message is we are not intimidated and we are absolutely determined to uphold the rule of law, to defend the UN Charter, because these are fundamental principles, and that's why we are here.
Russia's conditions for peace talks, which include Ukraine renouncing its NATO ambitions and withdrawing troops from regions claimed by Russia, were rejected by Kiev. They are viewed by many as tantamount to capitulation.
No responsible nation can say that is a reasonable basis for peace. It defies the UN Charter, it defies basic morality, it defies basic common sense.
The summit's final declaration called for the restoration of Ukraine's control over strategic locations, such as the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and its Azov Sea ports. Final statement was signed by more than 70 delegations, a clear sign of massive support for the war-torn country.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. The United States and Ukraine recently inked a 10-year security pact. That's a decade of promises to help Ukraine beef up its domestic defense capabilities. And let's not forget NATO's reaffirmation to keep 500,000 troops at high readiness. You know, just in case Russia decides to do something rash, like, invading a neighboring country. Speaking of Russia, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the bear that wasn't invited to the party. And predictably, they were not happy about it. The Kremlin's pre-summit rhetoric was vintage Putin, nuclear fear-mongering and proposals to strip Ukraine of a large chunk of its territory. Spoiler alert, the West gave these ideas a hard pass, much like you'd reject an expired coupon. Now, Central Asian states, not wanting to poke the Russian bear, steered clear of Switzerland. Of Russia's southern neighbors, only Armenia and Georgia showed up. Armenia's presence was a subtle middle finger to Moscow, underscoring their move towards the West. Georgia's delegation, led by President Salome Zurabishvili, also attended. Now, the president's role in Tbilisi is mostly ceremonial, so her endorsement of European integration is more symbolic than substantial. Zurabishvili and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had a sidebar chat about bilateral cooperation and mutual security challenges. They've both expressed a desire to integrate further with European institutions. About 100 delegations from countries and international organizations attended this summit. If the goal was to chart a path to end Russia's war in Ukraine, how successful was this event? By the end, 82 delegations signed a communique which included key points like ensuring nuclear safety and promoting the free flow of Ukrainian agricultural products. But even with such a low bar, not everyone was on board. Major players like India, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, Indonesia, and the United Arab Emirates did not sign the document. Why is that so? Well, for India and Saudi Arabia, Russia's absence was a deal breaker. South Africa had issues with Israel's presence given the recent UN-backed accusations of war crimes against Palestinians. Honestly, in 2024, getting most of the planet behind something feels like planning a party where half your guests don't show up because they don't like the band playing at the party in question. The summit ended with a document that was more notable for who didn't sign it than for who did. The Bürgenstock conference was a mixed bag, part productive dialogue, part high-stakes drama, and part why bother. The Western Alliance remains committed to Ukraine, while the absence of key global players highlights the deep divisions in the global support for Kyiv's struggle. And now here to shed more light on the issue is our guest today, Milan Leich, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the RBC Ukraine news agency. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So how successful do you think was the Swiss Peace Summit on Ukraine? There are many opinions which are being thrown around online and in various publications. What is your take on that?
Well, I think it was pretty successful. It was definitely not a failure. If all the goals that were set initially are fulfilled by Ukrainian side, perhaps not 100%, but still it was a success because it showed that almost half of the world, or even slightly more than 50% of the members of the United Nations, they are really united around the Ukrainian vision of how to achieve peace, just peace. I emphasize just peace, and how to end this Russia-Ukrainian war. So I think this is really pretty successful. Why this is not 100% success? Because we have to admit that not all the countries from the global south, they joined the summit. Not even some of them, some big countries that have joined the summit, that took part in it, they did not sign the final communique of the summit, which is also a signal. It is a signal that they are still waiting, that they don't want to, take sides, that they don't want to break ties with Russia, for example. So they are waiting to see what will happen in foreseeable future and later on the battlefield in geopolitics, how the elections in the United States going to end, what will happen in Russia, and so on. But still, I think that quite a victory for Ukraine is that we started this active communication with the global south, which was really a big problem for us because the Russian Federation, back from the times of the Soviet Union, they have established very deep historical ties, political ties, economical ties, even corruptional ties with many countries in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and so on. And Ukraine did not have enough resources to somehow counter these Russian efforts. But now we showed that still we managed to make many scores of these countries really interested in what's going on in our diplomatic efforts. So they really came to Switzerland, and this is just the beginning of a long way. I believe this is maybe not the first step, but one of the first steps on the way to the just peace. And how long will this road take? Basically, no one knows. I think that no one can predict it.
So I'm glad that you mentioned this renewed focus on the global south, because it is countries of the global south that could prove instrumental in ensuring what you refer to as a just peace for Ukraine. Now, do you think that this is what's likely to happen, that further involvement could be secured? We still have, as you mentioned, a couple of countries which were either absent from these deliberations or decided not to participate in the signing of the final communique. And there were some big players there. I mean, Brazil and India, for example. What do you think would it take to get countries like this on board? We know that they have their own foreign policy priorities, India in particular. Some countries are also dependent economically on Russia, so that's another thing. What strategy do you think Ukraine should follow to achieve this objective?
I think it should be like a multi-level strategy. First of all, these are the diplomatic efforts, just usual normal diplomatic work, very routine one, day by day, week by week, month by month, to talk to the politicians, to talk to their society, because Brazil is a democracy, India is a democracy, so their government really depends on what people think. So we have to work with those people to explain what's really going on, to counter Russian fakes and disinformation, which are quite strong there, and so on. So this is one level. The second one is, well, everyone in the world wants to be on the side of the winner. So it means that the stronger Ukraine is, the stronger is the Ukraine's performance on the battlefield, the more chances there are to involve those nations to take part on our side in any summit, in any initiative, and so on. So if they see that we are winning the war, okay, even if the war is not yet won by us, but still, if it is obvious that we are the ones who firmly hold this initiative on the battlefield, if the Russians are losing, that I think it will stimulate a lot of global South nations to join the effort.
Do you think that Ukraine can do it alone, though? Because there is a certain irony here that Ukraine, aspiring to form part of the Western world, is partially paying the price for the West's approach to the global South. Because Ukraine was not really guilty of any of it, but many Western countries were approaching the global South with condescension for decades. There is the question of the colonial past. Again, Ukraine was never a part of this. But now it does have to cooperate with the West, and the West has to do this soul-searching, looking at itself and asking itself the question, okay, so can we actually improve our relations with the global South in a way that we have not been able to do for the last couple of decades? What do you think?
Yeah, you're right. And also, despite the quite an obvious fact that our war, this war, is also an anti-colonial war because we are a former colony of Russia. We were occupied by Russia for decades and centuries in a broader historical perspective. But still, I think this is really quite a difficult point to explain to our friends from the global South, because they see that the Western nations, like especially Europeans, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, definitely, that they are on our side. So it's quite easy for them to take sides, because they see, those guys who oppressed us, who occupied us, those guys that we fought for our independence against, those guys to win our independence. So they are on the side of Ukraine. So we'll be on another side. We have to fight these stereotypes and prejudices. Surely Ukraine will never able to do it alone, on its own. Surely we'll need the effort of also these nations, because France and the UK, they are really quite a difficult relations, complicated. It's a better word, relations with many of its former colonies. So on the one hand, they really keep having very strong historical, mental, cultural, other ties with them. On the other side, there is really quite a strong anti-colonial sentiment in those nations. In particular, if you take like the Maghreb nations, the Northwestern African nations, former colonies of France. So many people there do not like France, because they think that those people from the European continent will never bring them something good, so on. So all these stereotypes have to be fought, and I think that also such forums as the SWIFT forum, they will also, it is a step in that direction, because everyone sits there at the round table. There are no like top tier nations and second tier nations. Everyone's equal. Everyone's able to speak openly, to sign or not to sign, to make
of course
their own decision, what to do with the communique and so on. So I think, again, this is just the beginning of a long journey, and I don't expect it to end quite soon.
Which brings me to the next question. Where do you think could the next summit, perhaps a full-blown peace conference, take place? Would it help for such a conference to take place in the global South? Saudi Arabia, for example, was mentioned as a possible venue.
Yeah, it will be logical, and our leadership also emphasized this, that it will be quite okay to have allocations somewhere in the global south, when Saudi Arabia seems to be quite an option. But I think a more important issue is the content of this second conference, not the venue, not the place, but what will be debated and who will come, and will Russia come, because Russia is openly invited there. But before that, we don't. No one needs just Russia to be present and keep talking all this nonsense stuff that Putin talked last week about some other his absolutely insane desires to occupy even more and more Ukrainian lands, which is absolutely unfair. We'll never agree with that.
He basically said Ukraine should surrender and then we're going to talk. I mean, this is not acceptable, is it?
This is not acceptable, and what is important, that not only Ukraine says that this is absolutely unacceptable, but big Western nations also emphasize this, that this is unacceptable. Like, give up Zaporizhia, give up Kherson, and there will be a firm peace, that this is absolutely bullshit. And they all keep emphasizing this, which means that here in this regard, we have a united position with G7 nations, which is really very important, because it also took our leadership a while to convince some of our partners. If you remember the first weeks and months of the war, we did not hear these wordings that that only like 1991 borders and only a UN chapter and so on, everything should be followed. No, we heard talks about like painful compromises and all this deliberations about Russia being so militarily strong, so much stronger than Ukraine, so on. We don't hear it anymore, because Ukraine proved first and foremost on the battlefield, but also internally, also socially, politically, geopolitically, economically, that it is sustainable, that it is able to keep on fighting till victory. And our friends in Paris, in Berlin, in Washington, they understood, they gradually, but they understood this. So I think, well, the positions of Ukraine and its allies from the West and Russian positions are, so opposite. They are 100% opposite. So as of now, I don't see a clear path on how to get to this second conference and how to establish a peace deal, a just peace deal, because Putin really gives signals that he's not ready to surrender, obviously, or even to agree to a certain compromises. He doesn't show any signals for that. I think that the major factor that will decide the fate of this war, the outcome of this war, and basically the fate of the world order in general will be the elections in the United States. If Donald Trump wins, I believe we'll see something. We may see something very different from what we used to see by now. No one knows. I think that even Donald Trump himself doesn't know what's going to happen, but it may be a major shift in positions, and it will have an enormous influence on Russia-Ukrainian war, on preparations to the second summit, to the third summit, on all this big global story.
So a lot depends on these elections. Donald Trump has made some disturbing comments concerning the support for Ukraine. This is a topic to be discussed at a later stage. For the time being, Milan Leich was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Bye.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has appointed Anna Tsivileva, a relative of his, to the position of Deputy Defense Minister. This move comes after the dismissal of 4 deputy defense ministers, signaling a broader shake-up of the military establishment.
Anna Tsivileva, who is the daughter of Putin's cousin, steps into a role that has seen considerable turnover amid the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Her appointment is seen by many as an attempt by Putin to consolidate power within the defense ministry by placing trusted individuals in key positions. The recent changes also included the promotion of Leonid Gornin, a former deputy finance minister, to the role of the first deputy defense minister. This appointment is particularly notable as it suggests a shift towards greater financial oversight within the ministry. This appointment follows a series of setbacks for the Russian military in Ukraine, with Putin reportedly seeking to surround himself with loyalists and individuals with close personal ties. The reshuffle is part of a broader strategy to reinvigorate the military leadership as the conflict continues to evolve.
Vladimir Putin is embarking on a two-day visit to North Korea. This visit marks a pivotal moment in Russo-North Korean relations, with talks expected to focus on expanding military cooperation between the two countries.
Vladimir Putin is going to North Korea. The country's essential partner since Moscow realized that conquering Ukraine is harder than hitherto anticipated. The backdrop of this visit is the war, where US and South Korea officials have accused Pyongyang of supplying Russia with military equipment, such as artillery and missiles. This alleged support is thought to be in exchange for military technologies and aid from Russia, despite both countries denying these claims. The international community has raised concerns over this potential partnership, as any weapons transfers would violate UN Security Council resolutions. The visit comes at a time when both Russia and North Korea face increasing isolation due to their respective confrontations with the West.
UEFA has prohibited the display of Russian flags during the Euro 2024 football match between Ukraine and Romania. The decision came into effect on the day of the match, following an incident where Russian flags were seen in the stands during a game between Serbia and England.
UEFA Euro 2024 is in full swing. Thousands of fans from around the world pour into stadiums in Germany to cheer for their countries. But the tournament is not without controversy. Before the Romania-Ukraine match, the Ukrainian Football Association alerted UEFA to the potential for provocation and altercations if the colors of the aggressive country were allowed in the stadium, referring to Russian flags. This proactive measure was taken to prevent any disturbances during the match. The ban follows reports of Russian flags being displayed during the opening match of Euro 2024 between Germany and Scotland in Munich, an act that was met with enthusiasm by Russian propagandists. The presence of a flag bearing in the name of the city of Belgorod, a location known for being a base for Russian forces attacking Ukraine, was particularly contentious. UEFA's decision underscores the ongoing tensions and the impact of the geopolitical situation on international sports events. The group stage games are being closely monitored for any signs of political statements or disruptions.
And so this episode of Eastern Express comes to an end. But please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.